All right. How are you guys doing? Can everyone hear me? Those of you who are here and present. Hopefully everything's coming through all right. Oh, good. Good. So the reason we are late is because our guest has not yet responded to my message. So I don't know if we're going to be having the interview tonight, but I figured since I scheduled something, I would just come on anyway for a few moments and talk to you guys, even if our guest ultimately does not show up, which I hope he does. I mean, I'm going to give him about 15, 20 more minutes. These things happen, but yeah, I was under the impression the interview was still happening. So hope he shows up. If not, we'll keep rolling with it. Hope you guys are doing well, though. This is my first live stream of the year, though, regardless of if he shows up or not. So thank you guys for being here. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I know. I know. I know. Hopefully he shows up. Hopefully. We'll see. We'll see. We will see. But in any case, I'll just sit here and talk for a little bit. How's everyone doing tonight, though? Those of you who are here and who did show up. Hopefully good. Hopefully well. Yeah, well, ultimately what happens is most of the time when a guest doesn't show up, most of the time it's just some mix-up or something. Or they just forgot about it, which is all a-okay. But look, I mean, so speaking of our guest tonight, I think Keith seems like a very interesting person. He's an ANCAP, which is interesting. I'm not an ANCAP at all. I've been down that path before. I've read the arguments, and I'm still studying and reading, but I've read a lot of the arguments, a lot of the theorists. I'm not an ANCAP whatsoever. But I think that his story about his evolution from progressivism to now a kind of anarchical libertarianism is very interesting. And a lot of his reasoning in the book is actually pretty inspiring as well. I think that very few folks that I've met have the ability to think in such precise and concise ways. And ultimately, when you think in concise and precise ways, you tend to get the right answer. So I find that inspiring as well. But yeah, hopefully he'll show up. If not, we'll reschedule, and I'll just sit here and talk to you guys for about 30 minutes, or as long as you people will have me stay, about things going on in the world. I don't do these kind of things often. I'm much more of a pre-recorded kind of guy, but if people will watch this stuff, and you guys will show up to these and interact with me, I'll do them. That's how this goes. So, yeah, I mean, I like doing off-the-cuff stuff anyway. It's interesting. Some channels are very interesting. Some of them, they'll build their entire content base off of live content. And then other channels just build their entire content base off of pre-recorded content. And some channels integrate the approaches. I find an integrated approach works better to reach different audiences. Quite a bit. He was an ANCAP philosopher. He is the philosopher that is considered to be the intellectual godfather of the ANCAPs. One of the most intelligent autodidacts I think that exists in history. The man's intellectual capacity and his ability to multitask and learn new information was absolutely insane. He was very influential in the discourse surrounding conservatism and libertarianism from like the 50s to like the 90s up until his death. He wrote Anatomy of the State and a few other good. Also wrote a lot of things, a lot of good history books as well, a lot of different works. Ethics of Liberty is a book that I have that he wrote as well. I have the edition that Hoppe wrote the foreword for. So no, I know quite a bit about Rothbard. And look, I mean, I'm not an ANCAP, but I admire Rothbard for his intellectual capacity, for his clear and precise use of first principles, and also for being willing to take on even some of the more vicious opponents that didn't agree with him, such as Ayn Rand. So I can't say enough good things about Rothbard in that respect, but I'm not an ANCAP though. not in the slightest. But our supposed guest is, and if he shows up, I'll definitely pick his brains about ANCAPism and anarchy and the relationship between anarchy and social contractionism and all that kind of stuff. Because it's important. It's an important topic. A lot of folks who pay attention to politics don't actually understand what they're paying attention to. They see it as a spectator sport as opposed to an involved process of comprehending certain concepts and then translating that comprehension into hopefully crafting sound policy. That's what political science really should be about, the science of politics. But it's not about that these days. It's about factionalism and elections and mediocre concepts that have been distilled to and presented to us as if they are necessary for our understanding of politics. So I think that's a shame. And as someone that studies philosophy, I find that to be especially a shame. Because oftentimes I'm accused of being pretentious. I'm accused of being so many different things because I insist that my politics comes with a healthy dose of depth. It comes with a healthy dose of substance. And sometimes, I mean, I'll be honest, there are people that even watch my content that also think that's a negative as well. But I think that if we're going to move forward as a country, if we're going to actually be able to repair some of the damage that has been done on a cultural level, on a political level, and if we're going to safeguard ourselves from domestic threats, we're going to have to be a culture and a society that actually takes things seriously, number one. Number two, by taking things seriously, rejects tabloidism. I'll get to that in a second. And number three, by rejecting tabloidism, defaulting to sound thinking and refining that sound thinking with a healthy dose of first principles. If I can get people to do at least one of those things, I would have done a decent job. If I can get them to do all those things, I would have succeeded in my mission, and I can shut this channel down and go do something else. But that's going to be a very, very long process. This system, this culture is inundated with mediocre concepts, so it's going to be hard to break that off, break the chains off. Thank you so much for showing up. I always see your comments on my videos, and they always make me smile. So thank you so much for showing up. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're supposed to have a guest tonight. He's not here. I'm going to give him a few minutes. Hopefully he'll show up in the next few minutes. If not, I'll just talk to you guys before I log off. Because I didn't do a video today either, because this is supposed to be the video. So I kind of have to make up for that somehow. I'm trying to get on the schedule where I'm doing one video every day. I'm doing my best. Hello, Blue. How are you doing? Good to see you. Very good to see you. I hope you're well. Hope you're doing well, my friend. But yeah, I'm trying to get in this habit where I do at least one video every day. So the next video, which will be out tomorrow, is going to be about celebrity culture. Now, why is it going to be about celebrity culture? Because you guys know we don't do gossip on this channel. We don't do drama on this channel. I think that drama is one of those things that just weighs down human potential. Like, seriously, we got this whole wide world to look at, and you're going to focus on things that just cause you strife and superficial entertainment. No. That's not good for you. It's not good for society. It doesn't help anyone whatsoever. It just perpetuates systems and cultures of mediocrity. And then by perpetuating them, normalizes them, legitimizes them, and further infects our world. So let's not do that. But having said that, there is a point to be made. that celebrities, in terms of the culture that they exist in today, they are an anti-culture. And the anti-culture is contrary to American society, or at least what American society should be. Unfortunately, it has become a part of our society because it's been normalized, as I mentioned a moment ago. But if you think of, let's go all the way back to the 18th century. If you think of how old world Europe treated certain people, certain figures, if you were a nobleman or a noblewoman, if you were a king or a queen, if you were a duke or a diplomat, in their own way, you were admired as a celebrity. And you were given status and you were assigned value, right, on the basis of your title. And that status and value was then propped up by the expectations and praise of people in the society who were fed this narrative. Are you guys following me so far? And so, God, what happened? So you never, when you drink tea, never sip where the string is. That's terrible. But so, in the same way that in the old world, your value as a human being was assigned to your caste, was assigned to your status, was assigned to your title, celebrities today are the new world version of that. And they are far more pernicious, meaning deadly, sneakily deadly. Because whereas a noble or a king is separate from the lower classes, in many ways, celebrities have become more intimate with us in the modern day by means of TV. By means of, let's start there, okay? TV. When you're watching TV, let's say you're watching a daytime talk show, it's as if that celebrity or that person has been invited into your home. There's a comfort level that comes with that, and a familiarity that comes with that. What man is familiar with, he will better appreciate. You will better appreciate the familiar scene of a store down the street from you than you will of a foreign scene of a store somewhere in Korea, because you've never been to Korea, presumably, under this example. Similarly, you will better appreciate a person and what they mean to you, okay, when they are more familiar to you and more close to you. So, for example, let me give you guys an example here. When I was a teenager, I loved Elton John. I still like Elton John. Not as much as I loved him back then, though. I was a fan. I had shirts. I had toys. I had everything. I had his albums. I had everything. Everything. My iPhone back then was just full of Elton John songs. And not just the songs themselves, but the songs performed live in concert. Like, I was just really into Elton John. And so, whenever I hear about Elton John, there's a degree of familiarity between me and him, even though I've never met the man in person at all. Okay, so someone who's able to separate themselves and not be in like a parasocial relationship where they are living through the celebrity via social media, for someone able to separate themselves, this kind of thinking is not bad. But a lot of people can't separate themselves from the status and prestige of a celebrity. And so this person getting undue praise that they don't actually deserve, this person being put on a pedestal when they may not actually deserve a pedestal, what happens when that happens? Well, first of all, we signal that merit is not very important, which is a concerning prospect. If merit is not very important, then how the society works is going to fundamentally change. It'll go from being a society that focuses on merit to being a society that focuses well on status, focuses on nepotism or networking. I'm not attacking networking. Networking is very important, but networking is a holdover of the mentality that says it's not what you know, it's who you know. To a certain degree, this is how things work in the world. This is how things work. To a certain degree, it's absolutely true. If you know someone and you want a position and you get in good with that person, the position can be more easily attained by you than if you didn't know someone. That's how it works. But it's a part of that status mentality that holds us back, though. Because a lot of people that are not qualified know someone. They may do things to that someone, things that are both illicit and legal, but unsavory. You guys get the hint? And then all of a sudden, that person gets elevated to a place they didn't have the mentality or the capacity or the values to actually get on their own merits. That's celebrity culture. That's really what it is. When you've got people running around giving commentary on political and social issues, when all they're known for is playing Fortnite or playing Xbox and getting 1 million views, that's a problem. It's a serious problem. When you got people, like you got Meryl Streep, remember that Meryl Streep? Brilliant actress rather, making political speeches at award shows and being hailed as the voice of a generation. That's a problem. Remember when Oprah made that speech a few years ago and people were like, oh my gosh, Oprah should be the president. What? The presidency is an office that lords over one of the most important bodies in the nation, the government, that is supposed to be governed with a set few principles in mind, and keeping those principles in our modern day world where so many things are interconnected also requires a lot of knowledge. Okay, so then why is Oprah, someone who is her entire career has been about media and appearances and keeping up appearances, why would she be the best person for an office that ideally requires substance? Well, because she's a celebrity. She's a celebrity, and she's been elevated to a certain level in the minds of people. Now, I'm not saying that Oprah is not qualified. I'm not saying that. Oprah obviously worked very hard. But what I am saying is that someone like Oprah should not be should not be in conversation for the presidency when she hasn't demonstrated to anyone her ability to govern the nation in a way that is sound, a way that is rigorous, and in a way that goes beyond platitudes. But celebrity culture suspends those three things I just mentioned, pigeonholes them, and places the person's status and the glitz and glamour of their celebrity ahead of every other distinction of meaning, every other metric of value. It breaks down the hierarchy of values and instills a mediocrity in our minds when it actually comes to deciding about important issues. So on that level, this is of course, a synopsis. But on that level, celebrity culture is dangerous. On that level. And it's consequential as well. It's consequential. I mean, and plus, forget about the societal impact, forget about the impact on the mind and processing certain issues. Just think about what celebrities go through. Many of them. Think about it. Someone mentioned the 60s. Yeah. Elvis, right? Now, I wasn't born when Elvis was popular. Some of you may remember Elvis, but I wasn't born when he was popular. But Elvis, I think, kind of exemplifies the potential downfall of celebrity life. So there's this old dialogue I read back in college called Hiero, written by the Greek philosopher Xenophon. I don't cite it very much because I don't think that it's I don't know, the ancient Greeks. I've kind of drifted away from them in my reading and my studying. But when you're in a place, the Hiero basically says that when you're in a place of elevated importance, they call it the tyrant. A lot of people who are in the city, who are just peasants, in the words of Hiero, or Xenophon rather, they will look at you as if you have achieved everything there is to achieve in the world, as if you have reached the pinnacle of greatness. Okay? But what Xenophon actually makes clear in the Hiero is that being a tyrant, being a ruler, being someone who has this elevated position opens you up to more pains. He didn't say pain, he said pains, plural. And opens you up to more things that you didn't have when you're a peasant. And this is true. If you're the president of the United States, you have more to worry about than a civilian. just by definition of the job. This is important for celebrity culture because when you're in a status, even if it's just pure attention like Elvis or whatever, you're opened up to more pains. Sometimes those pains are more easily self-inflicted than they were before. Elvis was a glutton. He ate a lot. Have you guys seen his diet? I've studied his diet. Like 5,000, 6,000 calories a day. Like fried donuts and stuff like that. Like really, 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 really bad stuff. But the luxury of being a celebrity can sometimes put the luxury of being a celebrity can sometimes put the, what's the word for it? Put the natural self-progression of being human to the wayside, right? Because if we accept that human beings are limited creatures, we can only focus on limited things, and we have to manage our time, our scarce time. Then we can accept that what you pay attention to, if you pay attention to it enough without any balance, will ultimately consume you. And when you're in a state of luxury, a state of perpetual comfort, where your connection with work, your connection with growth and advancement in your humanity is kind of limited by that celebrity, you can go into some very unhealthy situations. Elvis was an example of that. And by the way, I think he was a great musician, a great entertainer. He didn't really write his own songs or anything like that, but he was a great entertainer. I love Elvis. I think he was great. I listened to some of his concerts sometimes. But the luxury of celebrity picked him apart completely. Michael Jackson the same way. I love Michael Jackson. A lot of things happened in the Michael Jackson orbit. A lot of things. Some things I don't know if they are true or not. I don't know. But a lot of things happened. But from the time he was a kid, from the time he was a child, Michael Jackson was manufactured to be a status symbol by his father. Okay, these things have downstream consequences in society, right? So when people say, oh, celebrities being in politics is just nonsense, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's not nonsense because they share the same society that you and I do. And if they share the same society that you and I do, they can impact the processes that govern us, our politics, the same way you or I can, or maybe even more than you and I, because maybe they have more influence than us. That's the concerning thing. That's the troubling part. Sincerely. So, yeah, those are just my rambling. Sorry to ramble, but we'll talk about all that and more in the video tomorrow. I guess I kind of gave you guys the video, didn't I? I'll expand, of course. It'll be nicer, of course. It'll be less less scattershot. But those are just my preliminary thoughts. But yeah, as far as content goes, and okay, my guest has not come yet. He's not messaged me yet. Unfortunate, but it's all right. We'll just do it some other time. But so as far as content goes, what are you guys wanting to see from me? Because I was told by someone a long time ago that it is always unwise to make content for yourself. You should instead make content for your audience. So what do you guys want to see from me? You gotta tell me. Because the more engaged you guys are, the better off we'll all be. Better off the channel will be, rather. No, he never showed up, Rochelle. Unfortunately. But I'm sure we'll just reschedule it, though. But hey, the fact that I had 8 of you here, I think 8 or so, and we've been maintaining a amount of people for the entire live stream. That's inspiring, man. That's inspiring. No, I didn't think anyone was going to show up because I didn't see anyone in the waiting tab. But I guess when you actually start the stream, people get the notification, so they show up. I guess I don't know, but that's actually inspiring. Okay, I'll do more of these. If nothing else, this has shown me, you guys being here, that people do want to see more lives. If nothing else, which is great, by the way. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's great. Yeah. A lot of. See, it's funny. On this topic, actually, a lot of folks have one of two reactions when I tell them how young I am. One is disbelief. The other is just being confused, like they saw a three-headed hydra or a flying pig or something. Like it's just confusion. It's fun. I actually, at first, I won't lie to you. At first, I was like, "Damn, is it that serious?" But I've actually grown accustomed to it. It's fun. It's both fun and funny at the same time. It's quite amusing because look, I feel old. I may not be old, but I definitely feel old. I all the time. I feel I feel old. It's I don't know. Plus, I've been told my whole life, Christian, you're an old soul. So, hey, I embrace that. I embrace that. Okay, well, okay. I guess I don't really know what it's like to feel old. I don't. Okay, well, I shouldn't say that because I don't even know what that's like. I don't even know what that's like. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I just learned about Nickelodeon's dark history and being. Oh yeah, that's a topic in and of itself, isn't it? You see what happened with. So actually, there's a documentary coming out in the next week, I think. Where Drake Bell, someone who I grew up watching, is going to actually expose what happened to him. He was this big child star at Nickelodeon, and someone on set actually abused him when he was like a little boy. Mm-hmm. And this happens more often than not in Hollywood. And it's unfortunate. It's upsetting. And here's the thing. The parents know. A lot of the parents know the risks. And they still put their kids in that situation. I don't understand whatsoever. Is it money? Is it status? Is it power? It's bad parenting is what it is. That's most certainly for sure. It's unfortunate. Yeah, I'm on the East Coast, so it is nighttime here. It's still daylight on the West Coast, I think. Riley is on. Wow, I did not know that. I didn't know that. That is terrible. I didn't know that. Oh my God. That's terrible. Sister Wives. I've heard of it. I don't think I watched it before, but I've heard of it. How old is Sister Wives? That's actually a good question. How old is Sister Wives? Sister Wives. Is it like the what's that one show with Betty White in it? The Golden Girls, right? Is it like that kind of show? Golden Girls. I like that kind of show. That show's nice. That's a very nice show. That show warms the heart. It's a very nice show. And really, when you get into these older shows, whether it's Golden Girls, whether it's The Jeffersons, whether it's Family Matters, regardless, they do something to the heart, really, that modern shows can't even touch. Seriously, like, I'm not sure if any of you guys even have watched like Family Matters or things like that, but when I think of the family dynamics of those kind of shows, they paint a very different picture than what's painted today. A very different picture that's much more enriching, in my opinion. Much more narratively interesting than what's painted today. I don't even watch TV today. I can't. I can't. Well, first of all, I don't even have cable. I have internet. And I guess my TV would be, unlike a lot of YouTubers, I actually do watch a lot of YouTube. That's one thing I used to never do, but I actually watch a lot of YouTube. But I don't watch political YouTube. I don't do that. People say, well, you watch Ben Shapiro? I'm like, no Ben Shapiro, no Steven Crowder, none of that. No. The only political YouTuber I think I watch, okay, there are two. He's small, but he's someone who I've talked to before. His name is Brian. He's the front porch conservative. That's what he calls himself. He's a great person. I think you should go subscribe to him. He's great. Very down home, country like, common sense like social media creator. He's a good guy. I like him a lot. And I also watch Glenn Beck. Sometimes. That's it. The rest of my YouTube diet is, let's see. I like a lot of documentary videos. Like, there's this series called Fall of Civilizations, which basically goes through all the ancient civilizations from Egypt to Sumeria, Babylon, and demonstrates their history and their fall from a purely informative perspective. That's valuable information, right? People always look at Rome. Okay, Rome is a very powerful allegory, but what about everything else? Yeah, good, Rashad. That's so you're doing homeschool right. You are doing homeschool right. That's a very, very good series. That's a very good series. That's a very beautiful series. And the guy, I don't think he's British, but he does 2-hour-long videos. Like, they're very long. But I listen to them in the background while I'm cleaning up. They're very good. So I like Fall of Civilizations. Then of course there's some of the more spurious stuff that I watch. Some of the more silly stuff I watch. Like I enjoy. There's this one channel. This guy basically goes over like serious topics, but in a funny way. Like, he recently talked about cruises and how cruises had all these incidents on them where people are like, waking up with like feces in their toilet, all kind of crazy stuff. But he does it in such a funny way that it kind of takes away from the gravity of the topic. I watch that stuff sometimes. I watch a lot of anti-Scientology content these days. I watch a lot of anti-Scientology. So, okay, backstory on this. I've always had an interest in religions, cults, the occult, all that kind of stuff. Not in like a way to practice the occult. Don't get scared. I'm a Christian. I don't do that. But in a way to study it. Because I think that these things, all these ideas, are in a way a reflection of human creativity. Whether we agree with them or not. So I've always looked at all these kind of things and looked at them with interest. And Scientology, though, is just one of those things that just shouldn't. I can't. Number one, I don't take it seriously. But number two, if you look at the history of it, it is so predatory. It is so terrible. These guys were under audit by the IRS, I think in the 60s or 70s. Their founder, L. Ron Hubbard, who was a con artist, all kind of bad things, was hiding in the countryside when he died. He was, of course, being audited by the IRS because of tax evasion, all kind of stuff. Well, for years they were being audited, but Scientology quite literally deployed state-level intelligence agency type tactics against the specific IRS agents who were auditing them to intimidate them, to coerce them, and to scare them. They called their answering machines, parked cars outside of their house, all kind of crazy stuff. That they sent them mail that was threatening, and eventually the government backed off. Now, here's the interesting thing. I don't advocate for those tactics. They're bad, they're immoral, they're terrible to our free society. But churches that have been attacked by the government, whether it's during COVID, whether it's during the Obama era when they had the tax incident where the IRS was auditing certain religious organizations selectively, they've shown less force than Scientology has. And Scientology is not even a religion, it's a damn cult. I'm like, we shouldn't adopt their tactics, but I'm like, I wish more churches in America and more religious organizations would have the same level of commitment that Scientology has to their own self-preservation. Because if a cult founded by a con man can do it, why can't religions do it in general? I mean, it's just, that's one thing I think about when I see these parallels. You know what I'm saying? No, we don't adopt their tactics. Obviously, we don't do that. We don't harass IRS agents. We don't do all that. That's not okay. But these people, for years, just weathered this storm, the government coming down upon them. But of course, there's speculation. There's speculation. Oh yeah, no, the Amish. Yeah, no, the Amish are great. Their food is beautiful. They have great food. All their stuff is fresh. I have had Amish cakes and pies, and oh my gosh, I swear, I don't even know what to say. They are absolutely divine. Speaking of the Amish, I'm sure, have you guys heard about the Amos Miller case at all? The Amos Miller case going on out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Robert Barnes was actually the famous attorney. He's actually representing the farmer. So what happened was this dairy Amish farmer called Amos Miller was selling unregulated milk, like raw milk, to people. And the city of Lancaster, where he lives, was trying to shut him down. They were trying to stop him from selling all of his raw products to people. Now, he has clients all across the country, so he was sending them out. The government was trying to say that a few of his products were linked to some kind of foodborne illness. Therefore, they are a danger. Plus, they don't follow health and safety codes. Therefore, they are a danger. This is despite the testimony of literally thousands of his customers nationwide, many of whom who had no negative effects from his products, but also many of whom actually require his product to survive because they have medical conditions that prevent them from actually eating some of the stuff that's sold in grocery stores. And the state of Pennsylvania has been trying to clamp him down, attacking him, all kind of stuff. And so it's been national news. Robert Barnes out there representing him, and the judge, I think, upheld that he can't sell raw milk for commercial use, but he can give the products to his family. They were trying to stop him from giving the products to his own family. That's how intrusive this was. It's unfortunate, but I think that we should look into, people talk about two-tier system of justice. Well, it would pay for us to look into level of abuse that local governments, state governments, and in some cases the federal government and the administrative state do to landowners by way of eminent domain, by way of oppressive environmental regulations, by way of the selected application of certain food regulations. All of these things that many people, and even people that may be on the right, consider necessary for the functioning of a safe society are actually tools for the destruction of people that actually help our society run in the first place. People don't realize that. That's something important to realize, I think. Just an observation, of course. Yeah, no, that sounds very interesting. I've never been on one of their buggies, though. I would love to. I've driven behind an Amish. Imagine this, you're in the 21st century, driving a car, and there's this carriage in front of you, carrying two people with like horses attached to it. It's surreal to me, but it's great too. It's great. I think that modern society needs reminders of those old traditional ways. We need that, because with AI coming about and just tearing through the society, AI frightens me. It both frightens me and it excites me. It excites me because the dissemination of information is going to continue to increase to such a way that we may be able to provide a good quality, maybe truly free education to every pupil on the earth that has an internet connection. That is human progress at its finest, and that is something to celebrate. But the downside is that may be undermined because the truth value of what we learn will become disputed by the world that AI creates. If I can't tell you if what I am seeing is true or false, which is a reality that people have, even beyond AI, they have that in their own minds, but you add deep fakes to it. You add all kind of other things to it. You're going to further complicate the relationship between truth and falsehood. So what will useful information be in the new world when everything I see is potentially manufactured by someone sitting somewhere in a computer using an AI to do it? That's a big risk. That's a risk of societal impact, all kind of things. That's a big risk. That's a big risk. That's a huge risk. And it bothers me. Then you think about the implications that has on your moral thinking. That also bothers me as well. Right? So, in a world of AI and artificial algorithms and manicured world, all that stuff, we need the Amish and people like them. Because they help keep us connected to the, to the solid ground of truth. Okay, so Mr. Keith actually responded to me. Okay, so he responded. So he's going to come on. Okay, I'm happy I didn't end this because this has been an interesting conversation. So we're going to have this interview. It's going to happen. Okay, awesome, epic. So all of you who are not familiar with tonight's guest, his name is Keith Knight. He wrote a book called Domestic Imperialism, 9 Reasons Why I Left Progressivism. When he comes on the show, I'll actually put it up for you guys. And I think he's a fascinating character. He's been on Dave Smith's show and a few other big shows. You guys don't hear me talk very much about libertarianism on my channel. When I was in college, I was like a huge libertarian. Like big, you wouldn't believe how much of a libertarian I was. You wouldn't believe it. I've moderated out since then. Yes, he is. Primarily because, well, there are many reasons. That'll probably be a whole different video. There are many reasons. But I like to call myself these days a constitutional conservative. That's what I call myself these days. I am a constitutional conservative. And when I'm being more specific, I will say I'm a natural law-based constitutional conservative. And when I'm being even more specific, I'll say I'm an American natural law-based constitutional conservative. Right? Because those terms, in my opinion, encompass a broader reality than just mere libertarianism. But having said that, I think that libertarians have valuable insights to our society. I think that if more folks in our government heeded those insights, maybe our current state of politics wouldn't be so terrible. But the insights have limits. And I think libertarians are oftentimes blinded to those limits in some cases. But they're on the right track, though. So that's a different story, different day. Our guest is here. So this is wonderful. So give me 2 seconds here. Everyone, let me introduce you to Mr. Keith Knight. Hello, Keith. How are you?
Mr. Watson, I am so sorry that I did not have Eastern time correct. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Time zones are very tricky, and you've given me an opportunity to talk to people more, so that's great. So, you doing well tonight?
Yes, sir. I am just getting off work and ready to talk about whatever you have in mind.
Yes. So, your book is full. Before I would get started, tell everyone in the audience who is listening either live or listening later to the recording of this, who you are, what you believe, tell us about your book, and we'll get started.
My name is Keith Knight. I am managing editor at the Libertarian Institute. My belief is in advocating libertarianism, or the belief that human beings should cooperate peacefully, as opposed to some having the right to coerce others, whether that's in their private lives or whether they use the state as a surrogate to coerce others. So basically, nothing in life is something that we do by ourselves. Even if you are just reading this book, Domestic Imperialism, by yourself, You didn't build the computer, which allowed you to order the book. You didn't generate your own electricity, which allowed that computer to work. You didn't put the ink on the paper. You didn't chop down the trees to make the paper. So we're constantly cooperating. The false divide progressives are always giving us is there's things we do together and then things we do alone. Just by talking, you're using words that other people have spent thousands of years working on. So we're constantly engaged in actions that are affecting other people, and we're constantly cooperating. So the central question of my book is, should people achieve their ends through a cooperative mechanism, which means people have the right to freely disassociate with bad actors, or do some people, the state, have the right to coerce others under the guise of helping the working masses, helping minorities, helping women, or helping whatever demographic they claim to be. So that's who I am. That's where I work, Libertarian Institute, and that is a general overview of my belief system.
Okay, very good. So tell me. I immediately recognize, by the way, what you're saying. Perhaps it wasn't original to him, but it's best articulated by Leonard Read's thesis I pencil. So I believe you've read that, and that's I think that's really a very integrated way to see the world. It's a very rich way of seeing the world, and I think that it really gives form to the idea of a social interaction as a means of both progress and maintenance, right? Progress of humanity and maintenance of society, right? So I think that absolutely it's beautiful. So before I get into the book and its contents, I want to know more about your personal ideological journey. When was the moment, the one moment? Well, first of all, let me ask this. When you were a progressive, what did an average day look like to you in terms of consuming information, in terms of viewing certain events certain ways, in terms of studying and reading? Were you a progressive that was who was intent on understanding the tradition which your thought came from, intent on understanding concepts like class equality and workers' rights and things of that sort? Or were you simply ballast, as most people are in these cases, simply absorbing information like a sponge without ever actually analyzing it and interpreting it?
There was a lot of analysis and a lot of historical references. It's very common that people don't arrive at conclusions, through a lot of logic and reason just because the cost of doing so is so high. You have to read so many books, discuss so many things with so many people. So when you have historical narratives to lean on, for example, Franklin Roosevelt got us out of the Great Depression, LBJ gave us the Great Society, and Barack Obama got us over the hurdle of racist America, finally electing a black progressive into the White House. So I was constantly not looking at the ideological origins, like I hadn't read Woodrow Wilson's The New Freedom, but I was constantly looking for examples of history as to where this idea came from, which gives you a lot of grounding and much more confidence that you didn't just come up with something all on your own. You're actually part of a historical process. So that was pretty important for me. As far as the day to day goes, I would watch MSNBC quite a bit. It seemed like there were two groups generally, those who cared about the poor and those who did not care about the poor at all, or not necessarily the poor, but those who are in vulnerable positions overall. So when this dichotomy was presented to me, I had just said, well, looks like the Democrats are basically the party I should get behind, but the Democrats can be very establishment, and some of these places that could be called the left end up being just old boys clubs and get bought off by corporations. So progressivism was sort of the silver lining of the Democratic Party that I supported.
Interesting. So tell me about this then. What was that moment? Okay, when did you begin seeing cracks in the armor? At what point did you begin seeing cracks in the armor? Because what you described to me, you're correct. I think that you're correct that most people don't arrive at their political conclusions by means of deep reason or research. It's unfortunate because this is not a necessary fact of human life. In fact, it's a aberration of previous generations, right? If you think of the literacy of the founding generation, that every household, at least according to most estimates, had at least one book in it, and that one book tended to be either some philosophy book or most commonly the Bible, then you would see that a lot of people at least had some anchoring to the transcendent, some anchoring something beyond their own experiences in their lives, Whereas today, in this, I don't want to say this modern world, this rather this postmodern world, the subjective intuition is prided and emphasized over external searching for truth and meaning. And that has basically allowed people to become prisoners of their own epistemic errors, which then, of course, translates into creating political errors, because if a entire voting populace is led by errors of knowledge and they translate those into how they vote, how they think about politics, you'll ultimately get a system that reflects that. But also you get a non-engaged public by that as well, because they can't see beyond themselves. So what's the need to engage? So no, I think that's very interesting. So tell me, when did you start seeing cracks in the armor, so to speak?
So here is the first major crack, and this is why I open the book with it. I don't give my background story, but I give the example of what really changed my mind. There was a mass murder that took place on June 12th, 2016. It's referred to as the Pulse nightclub massacre. And the terrorist Omar Mateen went into the nightclub, killed 49 people, injured 53, and actually called 911 to amplify his motives for doing this. So here is how Barack Obama summarized the event. And it's important to know Barack Obama was not seen as your average Democrat. He was the progressive who was going to rein in the banks, represent the workers, initiate equal pay for women, and all this other, progressive platforms. Barack Obama said, "This was an attack on the LGBT community. Americans were targeted because we're a country that has learned to welcome everyone, no matter who you are or who you love, and hatred towards people because of sexual orientation, regardless of where it comes from, is a betrayal of what's best in us." So I remember hearing that and being very curious as to what this terrorist would have said, because much like a protest, the goal of terrorism is to amplify your motives as opposed to conceal them. So he gets his moment in the spotlight for committing this atrocity, this shortcut to fame. What does he say? We actually have the 911 transcript from Mateen's call. Here's what he said. "You have to tell America to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. They are killing a lot of innocent people. What am I to do here when my people are getting killed over there? You get what I'm saying? You need to stop the U.S. airstrikes. They need to stop the U.S. airstrikes. You have to tell the U.S. government to stop bombing. They are killing too many children. They are killing too many women." Okay? So when I first came across that, I said, okay, it turns out that the sitting president can just explicitly lie about the motives of an attack, and the press is not going to really call him out about this. This was so mind blowing for me that he mentions nothing about hatred of homosexuals, mentions nothing about hatred of Christians or Floridians, even though the attack took place in Florida. It was against young people. He didn't say anything about the young people. It was a result of blowback as a cause result of American foreign policy. I cite the Council on Foreign Relations this year. 2016, the U.S. government dropped 24,000 bombs on Iraq and Syria, killing a large number of civilians. According to The Intercept, research they did indicates that 9 out of every 10 people killed by these bombings were not the intended target. So this was really big for me. I said, I was so wrong about this issue. I had more or less assumed that the press and the president was telling the truth. So once I was so humbled at that, and President Bush also did the same thing many years earlier, I was so humbled at that. I said, instead of walking into every conversation is the way things ought to be is, I should just say, what do I know? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how sure am I? Because it's just impossible to know so much about so many wide issues. I can say I'm a 10 on these issues, but on these, I'm a 2 or a 3. And what's my justification? So once I saw the sitting president blatantly lying, this is not something I really thought could take place. But that's when I really started to open my eyes. I would say that was the unique point in my progressive journey where I was at least open to saying, I think I could be wrong about this whole approach of dividing people based on race, gender, nationality, income. And there's a much more true divide that we can have. And the Bible says it when Bible says, "Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal." These are genuine principles which can differentiate good people from bad, whereas progressives are constantly dividing people based arbitrarily.
Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. The interesting thing about Machine, when that story actually happened, when it first came out, there was speculation about his homosexuality, which of course there was never anything inclusive found. His father said that he wasn't, that way and things like that. He didn't seem to have any. Although people did, there are patrons of the club that claimed he had frequented it before. We don't know if that was true either. But it's very curious that he chose that particular location when he could have chosen the hundreds of other locations that may have even made more of a point, perhaps even like a I'm not giving anyone ideas for government. I'm just in like a post office, maybe something like that. And that's but regardless of the truth of the connection, it's the goal of the person who does proximity ethics, who considers something as right or wrong on the basis of what it is close to, as opposed to what it actually is in genuine principle, to confuse these kind of things to make their own agenda seem plausible. And I think that's what Barack Obama was doing. That's what the progressives were doing. That's what the media was doing. And so it's very interesting that you noticed that, though, because a lot of folks, including at that time, I think the GOP, Paul Ryan came out after that story and said, we support the LGBT community. So if even the GOP was captured by this mediocre thought form, how did you see through it? Did you just do more research? Did you fall into like a rabbit hole? Did you listen to a podcast? Like, how did it happen?
You know, it's not that I didn't care to see problems with the GOP. I just kind of expected it from them. I did not expect it from the progressive who I thought had my back through thick and thin. I originally came across it when researching at the Mises Institute. Their website has a large collection of things, just went down rabbit holes and eventually came across this story.
Wow, interesting, interesting. Well, and that's oftentimes how it happens, right? Oftentimes you don't really see a progressive to what you call yourself now. Call yourself libertarian or anarcho-capitalist or what exactly? Okay, let's say libertarian as an umbrella term. You don't really see a progressive to libertarian pipeline, but the inverse seems to be a concept in the media: the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. Right, that's a very big concept amongst a lot of folks in the establishment media, like the Washington Post. What's your opinion? Do both of these pipelines exist? If so, which one is pushing forth more people through it as opposed to the other?
You know, that I would have to give a little more thought to. I can say that I've met a large number of libertarians who came over after being progressives, because when you're a progressive, you already see the world through these divides. Sometimes it's boss and worker, sometimes it's black versus white. Even immigrant versus citizen can be a big divide. Bernie Sanders got some heat when he said that, well, something like open borders is just a Koch brothers policy, and we shouldn't really encourage large amounts of immigration. That seems like another false divide to me. So once I already had the divides down, I started slowly chipping away at them. So this idea that I genuinely thought until an embarrassingly late age that America was basically the only place where slavery had ever been practiced, because not because a teacher at school necessarily said that, but it was just so heavily implied when they say the unique thing about America is the Declaration of Independence, but also slavery. So I had never really looked into this. So when I came across the Code of Ernamu, one of the oldest legal codes known to history, to see the word slave mentioned multiple times in ancient Mesopotamia, thousands of years before Christ was around, that really surprised me. So instead of having this, well, America's the bad guy, well, how many current living Americans were slave owners? And does this mean that all people who, are descendants of potential slave owners, that we should see them as potential enemies? So once I started chipping away at the really false divides, it just inevitably led me to, all right, we have to have some method of differentiating the good people from the bad. So people who choose to engage in things like fraudulent interactions, people who use coercion or threats thereof, that's a genuine person who we should say is evil, and we can justly vilify them. But so many things were just based on accidents of birth, that I was ready for the divide, but the progressive divide just kept chipping away all the time. The main one you see is the black versus white divide, where they're constantly using demographics to play off to play one off against the other. So when I was just used to saying that whites are generally the problem overall, well, the evidence lies in the fact that there's a disparity among the black population and those who are arrested or assaulted by police officers. It took a long time for me to come across Thomas Sowell's work, who said, well, men are 50% of the population and they're 95% of those killed by police. What does that tell us? The police are sexist against men? Turns out that whites don't even have the highest incomes in this white supremacist society. You have Taiwanese Americans, Nigerian Americans, Vietnamese Americans. What stupid white supremacists are running the show here? And it turns out black immigrants who have a different culture have higher incomes than native blacks. So the idea that I was just vilifying people based off country or skin color, it turns out I became the very thing that I thought I was against.
Yeah, no, I think that it's interesting. Both the progressives and the actual white supremacists, the actual white identitarians, who use the argument about white supremacy in either direction, both of their points are equally disproven by empiricism. When you look at the achievement rates of Nigerian Americans, the white supremacist pro point is proven, and so is the black victimhood narrative disproven at the same time. It took me a long time to realize that, but it really goes to this idea that you have also mentioned in the book, closer to the end of it, when you talk about National Socialism and Democratic Socialism, about these things having the same genus, but just manifesting in different forms, right? Which I want to get to that in a little bit because I found that curious. And I've heard that before, but the way you've explained it was very precise. But I wanted to touch on something else. So another one of the reasons why you left progressivism, according to your book, you have a chapter called Consent of the Governed and Gay Marriage. So the second part of that interests me quite a bit. And so you begin in this chapter by saying that progressive victory, I quote, progressive victory to legalize gay marriage in a predominantly Christian country. This was justified from many different standpoints, among them being that they are adults, straight people, that kind of stuff. And then after you list all these points, you say that all it took for me to leave progressivism was for me to take this principle of free association between consenting adults and apply it consistently in the economic realm. So are you saying that the progressive stance on gay marriage actually allows you to translate into a different context a justification against progressive thinking and economics?
Yes, simply because instead of using the talking points, at some point you repeat it so often that you end up extracting the very principle. So, for all the objections to gay marriage, it really just came down to these are consenting adults and marriage is just a contract. So, well, is it okay to, marry little kids? Well, now you're not dealing in the realm of consenting adults. So if we say that people should really be empowered to, live the lives that they want, interact with who they desire to, well, marriage is one thing that you do. Some people do it multiple times, but the economic realm is something you're constantly engaged in every moment of your life, even when you choose to do, nothing or just hang out. Well, that's you actively disassociating from all of the other potential things you could be doing. So the progressive clearly sees this when it comes to attempts to restrict voting rights. They'll say it is terrible if you need a license in order to vote. This hurts the most vulnerable people in society. But they don't see that having, requiring dozens of licenses and all of these training degrees in order to get your foot in the door at a job you really want. They don't see how that absolutely crushes people's dreams of, achieving whatever career they'd like to be in. So they go for more entry level jobs and they have a less likelihood of getting on the job experience in something that they want, getting their foot in the door, developing a network in this area. And it makes people far less successful than they otherwise would be. So this constant restricting of choice is something that the progressives are frequently advocating. Now, there is something, the paradox of choice, where it turns out the more options you have, the less satisfied you will be because whatever you choose, there were 100 other things that could have been much better. And it can get overwhelming. If there's two options on the menu, you'll most likely be happy with whatever you got. If there's 300 items on the menu, like the Cheesecake Factory, whatever you get, you're like, oh, I could have gotten something much better. So this is sometimes justified as, see, more choices isn't always better. So I can actually agree with that. The progressive will frequently say, Bernie Sanders saying, well, look at all these deodorant options and all these toothpaste options. This is just terrible and redundant. The question is not, should people have choices that are in high quantity or low quantity? The question is, who's going to decide? Either people decide for themselves, but when I say for themselves, they're looking at Yelp reviews, they're looking at brand names, they're talking to other people who have consumed the product. So they are the ultimate decision maker in the end. What I'm saying is not that that's a perfect system, but it's far superior to having surrogate decision makers in the form of politicians who do not give you the option to try new things, to get your foot in the door without occupational licensing, to build buildings without a very high number of permits, which make it so it's so costly to expand your operations. This creates the very oligopolies that progressives say we have to watch out for, because Walmart and Amazon are constantly able to afford all this stuff, all of these, regulation compliance costs, but the average person is not. So they go into lower fields and end up staying there longer than they otherwise would. So this constant coercive restriction by the state of progressives was really a major reason that I left progressivism. And in order to really justify the move, you kind of have to build yourself mentally a golden bridge to retreat across. So it was hard to say, yeah, I guess I've been wrong about everything for, the last, 2000 Facebook posts or something. So when I sort of had that gay marriage bridge to retreat across of, yeah, this thing we've constantly been saying and harping on of how important it is to give consenting adults the option to make big decisions in their lives. Yeah, that's what I believe in, just more realms than this one. So, yes, that is the gay marriage to voluntarism pipeline that I had.
Well, let's get a little bit nerdy in terms of the matter of consent. A lot of people don't realize, and you do because you've covered it in your book, and I've watched you on other shows as well. But a lot of people don't realize just how gargantuan of a moral concept the idea of consent is, and just how radical it is in the history of the world. More folks know how radical it is in the history of the world than they know how gargantuan it is. Because reflexively, a lot of people in Western society, reflexively, when they are confronted with a moral choice, consent will be the fundamental hallmark of their moral thinking. That'll be the reference point. Sometimes harm will be too, and oftentimes I always argue that when consent and harm are joined together in harmony, they are able to make for the best moral decision making. But sometimes just consent. And recently, from the right, there's been an attack on this concept. They call it consent-based morality. From the post-liberals, they call it themselves, people who are skeptical of America's classical liberal foundations, who believe that the reason why society has so much decay and chaos today is because of the excesses of this sort of individualism. They call it atomization, and they'll call it consent-based morality, where nothing is sacred and everything is just a transactional set of two wills merging together in space. How does someone like you, who uses first principles, who very clearly cares about a certain kind of morality, deal with those critiques in an effective way? Because on the one hand, it is absolutely true that to simply say consent should be the golden standard of all morality, that's not satisfying. It's not satisfying because the moral realm is not simply a matter of human choice. The moral realm is also a matter of human persuasion. It's also a matter of belief, matter of values, a matter of social influences. It's a matter of a bunch of things. It's a matter of duties, of obligations. So many different things. And other ideas and motivations and laws that may inform how one uses their choice. And so one of the reasons that I think, and this is one of the weaknesses of libertarianism, I think, is that libertarians, when it comes to social and cultural issues, all they can say is, well, I personally believe this in my own capacity, but you do what you want. Okay? Well, if we're thinking about these things on the political realm, fine, that is the just answer. But the political realm does not encompass everything else, or at least it shouldn't. In all reality, it has a lot more influence than it should, but it shouldn't. So their moral thinking in terms of how politics should be run is oftentimes conflated with moral thinking on the cultural and social level, which is concerning. So what do you think about all that I just said?
So it's not that I'm advocating anyone do what they want and I'm fine. The question is who's going to have the standards? Either people are going to choose their own standards and associate with people who they have standards who they appreciate based on how they talk, how they act, if they show up on time, if they're polite, if they're hard workers, if they're lazy. We can constantly have this regulating mechanism in society that's used by disassociating with people who don't meet our standards. What the statist position is that politicians should be able to coerce standards universally for basically everyone within a certain geographical area. So it's not that there's either standards or no standards. It's who gets to decide. This is Thomas Sowell's thesis in his book Knowledge and Decisions. That when you can both want, good standards in food, housing, medicine, people you spend your time with, churches, the aesthetic pleasantness of buildings and architecture. It's not that there shouldn't be standards or whatever someone chooses to do is totally fine. The question is who's going to have the standards. Either people are going to have their own standards or politicians are going to unilaterally decide. It's not that I have so much faith in people that they're always going to do the right thing and do the most efficient thing or do the most beautiful harmonious thing. It's that I don't trust a subset of those people who are attracted to political power having the right to coerce millions of total strangers in such a way where if they're wrong, they face very little to no backlash if they are wrong. So I disagree that it's about not having standards and saying, so long as it doesn't affect me, I'm okay with it. I think that's absolutely terrible. Every time you choose to go to a restaurant or not spend time with someone who was formerly a friend of yours, that is you engaging in having standards and setting rules for the society you live in. As far as the importance of consent, all I'm really saying here is that all else equal, consent is far preferable in the absence of extreme examples to coercion. It's simply what differentiates rape from lovemaking, civilized from uncivilized behavior, theft from trade, kidnapping from spending time with other people, enslavement from work. So that's why I think consent is so important. So if we take that concept of it's not what should happen, but who should decide. If we look at duties and obligations, take military conscription, for example, it's not that I don't think people should fight for what they believe in and defend their homeland against aggressors. I absolutely believe that. The question is, should politicians be able to coerce people against their will in fighting for such a thing? And who should fight in what amount, to what extent, for what end? If, someone was going to take all of Florida, well, you'd have to weigh the costs and benefits of the Biden regime ruling Florida, or I guess it's, realistic in the minds of some people that Vladimir Putin could take over Florida or some parts of America or, use some methods of influence. So not everything terrible is worth, totally dying for. So we could either have a method of conscripting people against their will, or you could let people decide for themselves what is worth fighting for to what extent. And since they actually have to bear the cost, they're the person in the body experiencing this world. They should be the ultimate decision maker. So I respectfully disagree that it's about not having standards and saying, well, whatever someone chooses to do, that's okay. people constantly have very high standards in the free market. That's why businesses go out of business, because people choose something else. That's why some big budget movies are total flops, because people don't want to associate with those sorts of things. That's why Hollywood has been like, I didn't even know the Oscars took place the other day, and I wasn't avoiding it. And the Oscars when I was a kid was like this huge thing. This is people voluntarily shifting their standards away from terrible degeneracy. John Cena had some stunt on stage, and I'm actually glad that I missed the whole thing. So, so people can constantly have standards. Standards are vitally important. That's why they shouldn't be in the hands of politicians.
Yeah, no. So by the way, I wasn't saying that you can't have standards under kind of morality. I was playing devil's advocate, and I'll keep doing that because I think this is very important. Not enough libertarians think about morality. They just don't. They think about it in terms of being coerced or not being coerced. That's it. That's a limit. Okay, so beyond the political context, let's put the political context to the side, because this is how I personally phrase my morality, okay? I phrase it with two categories: what is permissible and what is preferable. So there's an objective set of first principles in the first category that if I don't follow them, not only will society fall apart, but individuals will be in enmity with each other. Death will happen, disorder will happen, chaos will happen, and ultimately society as a whole will be undermined. And ethics is simply the science of according right and wrong action as it relates to other people, i.e. ethics is a social practice. Therefore, if society is gone, ethics can't really matter anymore. So it's important to preserve society. So among these permissible principles is justice, which is simply refraining from violating someone's rights, honoring your oaths and your contracts as they're written out, things of that sort. Veracity, being truthful, right? Those are the primary two of the sort of more than like these create the permissible realm. But when it comes into the realm of preferability, you have charity, you've got goodwill. I don't think a societies can exist without people being nice to each other. It's better if they are, but they can still exist. If you respect people's rights, you can still have a society where people are mean. So goodwill, charity, these kind of things. We're not by moral necessity compelled to do them, but society is enhanced if we do. I'm more worried about the second realm, because let's go beyond the political realm, right? I think that's too much of the focus, because the arguments of the people that do want to use the political realm to impose their moral order upon all of us, the post-liberals, the national conservatives, these people, is that when you divorce government from a sort of community ethos, you get a society that's in chaos. And they will oftentimes use the society as a reference point to make their points. They'll look at transgenderism, for example, or the annihilation of womanhood as evidence of a laissez-faire society run amok. Because how do you actually prevent these things? Is it just people raising their voices and trying to stop them? Or is it something that's going to be more assertive and more muscular? Whether it be, this is another example, this actually kind of turned into a meme, whether it be before Elon took over Twitter, big tech censoring people, the New York Post getting their story censored about Hunter Biden's laptop. There are a lot of people making a joke out of the "it's a private company" phrase, because they're saying if there are companies that control the most amount of resources, so much so that competition is not effective in the public discourse, what use is it for it being a private company? And then there were others that were saying that is it really a private company if the government funds them and gives them special backdoor access? I think that if we're going to comprehensively answer our foes, because by the way, I agree with you entirely. If we're going to answer our foes, we have to be comprehensive in how we view morality in society. It can't just be coercion bad, consent good.
Correct. I believe it's necessary but not sufficient to value consent, or at least have it as the center focus of your ethical worldview. So the claim that transgenderism and degeneracy are the result of a laissez-faire society. We could say maybe the transgender issue, we could maybe measure it from 1980 80 to 2023, where it's gone from barely anyone talking about it to it being in a headline multiple times a day on major news outlets. So, according to that theory, since it's the result of too much laissez-faire, we would have seen a drastic decrease in that 40-year span of government regulation and no hands on the economy. We would have seen major abolitions of large sectors of the government. The Department of Education had to have been abolished since, it's a laissez-faire society. And government spending, of course, would have drastically decreased in that time, according to that theory. The problem is the exact opposite has happened. And in response to that, they've said, well, there's too much freedom. Of course, this is constantly the result of mostly college academics who get state funding constantly through programs with Sally Mae, where the government's constantly getting people loans. They're doing such a bad job in K through 12 education that kids almost have to go to college in some cases in order to get a job in the future. And once they funnel people into these colleges, they teach them all of these ridiculous ideas of egalitarianism, these ideas of constant white supremacies everywhere, and things like transgenderism. So, if the state really was the solution to something like this, we would see the state either growing and this degeneracy constantly shrinking, or we'd see the state shrinking and the transgenderism advocacy growing in correlation. The problem is, well, we get the exact opposite. More government involvement has led to less accountability in these areas. Where I can't imagine actually voluntarily funding anyone who doesn't think there's a valuable difference for a society to have between men and women. I don't know. Men have what, 17 times the amount of testosterone women do. So, of course, we're going to have massive inequality in the results of these two demographics. The idea that people could be, transracial or transgender, I think is absolute lunacy. And the state has not done much to prevent it. In fact, people like Joe Biden are constantly pushing it forward. Whereas, according to this theory, you'd think that the government would be saying, hey, private sector, stop being so degenerate. Here's, the accurate way to live. We get trillions of dollars a year in taxes. We're going to spend it towards, fighting degeneracy and all this stuff. They're constantly amplifying it. Even Donald Trump had 4 years, two of which he had a Republican Congress, and did not do much. Of course, he should have abolished the Department of Education and taken all state funding of colleges down to zero. Anyone who's promoting such ridiculous nonsense. So that is my response to the claim that laissez-faire leads to lowering of standards, leads to total degeneracy. As far as whether or not private companies have the right to do what to do what they'd like, well, there's two ways to go about this. One way is to have a very consolidated structure where the state gets the final call and then they get to delegate licenses of who gets to say what things and what news is accurate and what news is inaccurate. Or you can say that there is no solution, only trade offs. And in this worldview, you say that anyone who amasses large amounts of power is going to be corrupted with it, especially if there is coercive power. So, yes, we did see Twitter blocking the story from the state who was actually. So the state actually is the one, blaming the Vladimir Putin. You had 50 intelligence officials come out and say this Hunter Biden laptop, according to Politico, is Russian disinformation. They ran with the story for the second time after faking it in 2016. Russiagate 2.0 was again, and then there was Russiagate 3.0, where Joe Biden on the debate stage said Vladimir Putin has put bounties on the heads of American soldiers in Afghanistan. So the government was behind all of these lies. And how did they get out? Well, not necessarily because there was a government committee who then brought us the truth, but it was other competing private organizations like the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore. Those were the people who actually got the truth out about Russiagate. So, yes, there are tons of amounts of fallibility in the voluntary sector. And the solution to that is more competition and less monopolies. That is the ultimate, what I call the unavoidable contradiction of progressivism, is the claim that monopolies are bad. Also, the state should monopolize taxation. The state should monopolize the money supply. The state should monopolize guns. The state should monopolize the judicial system. all of the things that they're worried about being the result of a voluntary monopoly that could hypothetically happen, even though alternatives are constantly coming up, they actually advocate that as the solution to too much competition. So all of the problems you have with big companies in the voluntary sector apply many times over to the state sector.
No, and Belly, that's a very good response. I don't want to linger too much from this point. I could push, but I think that's sufficient for where we are right now. I just think that it's very important for those of us who work from first principles. And I believe, from what it sounds like, we have a natural law viewpoint of ethics as well, who work from that set of first principles as well, to speak about morality in the most expansive way possible. Because coercion, a moral perspective on coercion is simply one domain of the broader moral universe. There's several other domains that I think aren't really touched by libertarians at great peril. And I think people will oftentimes say that libertarianism is not libertinism. Well, you're correct. In definition, it is not. But in practice, many libertarians do become libertine because they don't think about morality beyond the issue of coercion and state power. So
Well, we could also
that's a
look at
problem.
all the degeneracy among the elite class. There was the Franklin cover up with the Republicans in the 1980s, where there
Sure.
was a
Yes.
pedophile ring. There was the Jeffrey
Sure.
Epstein pedophile ring that the big
Sure.
statist Democrats were recently operating and then covering up. So it's not like degeneracy is just some libertarian thing.
Oh
Nope.
no, it's
When you
not. It's
give
not.
these, yeah, yeah.
It's not. It's not. It's a human thing, by the way, and I don't like it when people try to tie degeneracy to a political philosophy. It's a human thing, right? And by the way, I'm not saying this unanimous. I was in Students for Liberty for all 4 years of my college. I was steeped in Nozick and Rothbard and all that stuff. So I'm not saying this out of animus. I'm just saying this because in my own journey towards constitutional conservatism, that's where I am now, and being a much more conservative person in that respect, I found some things culturally libertarianism that didn't comport with me. But some of the values have stuck with me. Obviously, if you look at my political philosophy, you wouldn't be able to tell that I was any different mostly. But I simply like to still man because it's important for those of us who do value human freedom, who do value the human being in its fullest capacity, to be able to stand strong on that beyond simply looking at a certain domain. So that's all. I'm just trying to do some friendly pushing and nudging. But yeah, so you mentioned something that's actually quite interesting in your book, and this is closer towards the end, but I found it to be very insightful. It's in the title. It's in the thing titled "The Difference Between Democratic Socialism and National Socialism." There's like no difference between it, and you say that that they are only different in rhetoric, but not in terms of means to achieve their ends. So can you expand on that?
So what I am doing here is I'm trying to extract a definition as to what these terms actually mean. I'm referring to communism as the abolition of private property, as Karl Marx and Frederick Engels did. I'm referring to socialism as the institutionalized aggression against private property, and capitalism as a social system of private property exchanges between consenting adults, mainly, including the right to contract and whatnot. That is what I believe differentiates capitalists from socialists from communists. So, when looking at democratic socialists and their blatant opposition to National Socialism, they're in a very glassy house, throwing a lot of these stones at the terrible Nazis everywhere. Well, it's important to ask, what is it about National Socialism that they oppose so much? And usually it'll be something like too much hierarchy or judging people by race, as if the progressive is not constantly, as if the average democratic socialist today is not constantly generalizing people by their race. They both believe that the state should monopolize key features within society, including the money supply, the judicial system, compulsory education, etc. So when you look at it through this lens, that the National Socialist wants to constantly coerce millions of strangers under the guise of helping the nation, and the Democratic Socialist constantly wants to coerce millions of strangers under the guise of helping the working masses. I think they are both absolutely fallacious. I do think that the average National Socialist says, "I want what's best for my country. This is the collective I'm a part of, and I want the state to represent those values." I think they're both totally sincere, but they both advocate one group having a monopoly on violence to a very large extent. I'm not talking about the average person who just believes, the state is some Hobbesian necessary evil or anything like that. So, because the Democratic Socialist has basically no principle to differentiate what the state can and cannot do, they're no different in principle than the National Socialists. One of the main things that I mentioned in the book is the iron law of oligarchy. This is the
Mhm.
idea that any system that starts out as very, very democratic in its origins will eventually develop into an oligarchy. So much so that it's an iron law within all organizations, between all humans in the human race. So you can ask, well, now communism's more about equality, socialism's in the middle, and capitalism's about inequality. But it turns out, if you look at Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Roosevelt, Truman, Genghis Khan. You look at Aristotle, who I know wasn't a political leader or anything, but all of the major people throughout history, in all these different countries at all these different times, had a very, very disproportionate amount of power relative to the average person in the society they lived. So when the Democratic Socialist says, "Well, we're much more about equality and getting people involved," that is such a fool's errand that it's not even to be taken seriously. The classic example is that of a labor union where, say, you have the bourgeoisie who make a lot of money, and then you have the workers who want to unionize to fight the bourgeoisie and sort of counterbalance the amount of power. Well, it turns out, and this is a classic example given by McKells, who started the theory popularized by James Burnham. The response is, well, not everyone wants to go to work and then attend a union meeting. Not everyone is going to have good ideas about what the union should do. Not everyone's going to be courageous enough to speak up. Not everyone who speaks up is going to be equally persuasive. Not everyone who speaks up and is equally persuasive is as good looking as other people who might get more attention and social status because of that. So what you end up is you end up having Jimmy Hoffa and a few friends running the union for tens of thousands of people who have very little, if any, influence. So the entire
Mhm.
democratic socialism justification of, well, we're about empowering the little guy just as much as anyone else, that is not possible to do in any society.
Mhm.
Once you get more than three or four people, even if you get four people who are related. I mean, look at the disparity between, the Baldwin brothers. I use them as an example. One much more famous than the other. These people are directly related in many times. Grew up in the same household. Compare Barack Obama to his brother George Obama. Drastic inequality in the amount of power that they have. I also use Oprah Winfrey and her siblings. She has much more institutional power and wealth than people who she's directly related to. So the entire claim that, well, the Democratic Socialists are different because they're about empowering, the little people. It is the same exact thing where you end up having a few people coercively dominating everyone else. So because this iron law exists, the question is, which sort of social arrangement should we recognize as legitimate? One that gives us an elite class as the result of voluntary exchanges and voluntary contracts where we can disassociate with the elites if they get degenerate or corrupt or anything else, or one in which they have a monopoly on violence and there is no recognized right to disassociate from a bad elite. So, elite is a constant. It is a constant throughout all societies, and we have every reason to believe it'll always be here. I just think libertarianism is a better approach than democratic socialism to the inevitability of elites that will exist. The original term, I think, was natural aristocracy, but that this is what that gets into, and that's why I don't think there's a real difference between democratic socialism and national socialism.
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, wherever you have human beings of varied abilities and potentials, you will get varied outcomes. It's an axiom. Um, although I think, and just to still in the democratic socialist perspective, even in a society which in this world we're constructing is based entirely on voluntary interaction and everyone's free, just like we shouldn't assume there will be an equal amount of skills and life outcomes amongst people, we also shouldn't assume there's going to be an equal amount of knowledge amongst people either. And how people use their consent and what principles and values guide that is almost as important that they have the ability to voluntarily associate. How do you fix that problem? Because most folks are ballasts.
Yes. So tell me if I'm evading this because I want to get to the root of it.
No, but that's good. Speak.
This knowledge asymmetry I mentioned in a section titled "Government Failure." This knowledge asymmetry is constantly going to exist in any society. So I just think it's preferable to have a society where you can look at Yelp reviews and choose to disassociate with bad actors. You can watch YouTube reviews. Every single product I've ever thought about, I go, I just heard about this. I wonder if there's anything on YouTube. You have YouTubers reviewing this stuff. So that is one way to fight the inevitable knowledge asymmetry that will always exist in any society. So the question is, having a state absolve this from happening? I actually argue that it constantly amplifies it. What percentage of Americans are equally informed on what goes on in the education system? How many people have read how many laws? When it comes to reading one law, the average person has not taken the time to read it. And I don't blame them, because even if you read the First Amendment, you have 9 Ivy League trained Supreme Court justices who don't agree on the interpretation of that amendment, let alone, the troubled asset relief package of 2008, which is 1,000 pages and has all the bailouts and everything. What percentage of people understand agricultural subsidies? There's constant knowledge asymmetry among the citizenry. Compare it to government officials who have access to classified knowledge. Huge knowledge asymmetry.
Yes.
A politician who's been in Washington for Joe Biden's been in there like 40 something years.
50,
You think
yes.
he has you think his knowledge is equal to the average Biden voter? Not even close. And the same applies for supporters of Ocasio-Cortez and anyone else who says knowledge asymmetry is a justification for the state coercing others. I think it amplifies the worst aspects that inevitably exist in every society.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. That's right. And again, I don't want to push too hard, but I think that it's oftentimes when no, it's all right. Oftentimes when libertarians talk about the importance of voluntary cooperation, we're all thinking in the moral terms of coercion being bad, the individual having some kind of moral value, human interaction being good. I just wonder, because voluntary association, the beauty of it is that it reflects human diversity, and that leads people to different situations, right? We can voluntarily associate. You can come on Christian Watson's podcast at 10 o'clock at night, EST, and get grilled on philosophy, or you can go join a cult in northern Africa, or go join Jonestown and get taught by a prophet who's supposed to give you the keys to heaven. It's a political system, ideally, should be agnostic on which choice that you choose. We agree on that. But to sustain a culture of freedom beyond the political system, people in that culture, I'm not so sure, should be agnostic on that. Obviously, I can't force you not to join Jonestown. If you want to go join a cult and you're like convinced at that point, okay, you have a totalizing worldview that has dominated your mind, it will be dangerous for me to try to stop you to do anything. And it will also be immoral, of course. But there should be extreme social stigma from doing that kind of stuff. And that stigma should be coordinated on a mass level. But I find that a lot of people who are into disassociation and going into their own silos, in some cases, when they find people they don't like, they don't like doing that kind of thing. Well, if they want to believe that, let them go. Okay, we can let them go, but we should make it uncomfortable in some way, shape, and form for dangerous associations to take place in the society.
Yeah, definitely. I try and hint at this in the book. Maybe it's a larger rant for a different treatise. But if you look at what the Jehovah's Witness does, I think we can learn a lot from the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witness, who passionately make the case for what they believe in. They use, bashing people, that not
Hmm.
physically, but they use high amounts of disincentives in order to encourage certain behaviors and disassociate or
Hmm.
discourage bad behaviors, provide disincentives. I think we can do the same exact thing. I don't agree with the Jehovah's Witness on their general worldview, but simply
Hmm.
that tactic of here are our standards, and even if I think you're going to burn in hell for all of eternity, I'm still going to give you the final say, but I'm not going to stop bringing this up. I'm going to keep inviting you to church. I'm going to make my
Yep.
church gorgeous and give you every incentive to come and visit. I'm going to be the nicest person you know, along with all my other friends. So you're going to say, well, those Jehovah's Witnesses, that I just enjoy being around them. So you're going to want to spend time with us. So these methods of using heavy amounts of persuasion to encourage civilized behavior and disincentivize bad behavior, I think is totally consistent with libertarianism. And you're absolutely right. It's something that we have overlooked for far too long. It's difficult to, get a fish to appreciate the water that it's always lived in. And when you've always lived in
Yeah.
a sane culture, it doesn't occur to you of, yeah, people can do whatever they want. Wait, you're smoking how much pot? Wait, you're
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
what to your genitals at the doctor? You getting them removed? Okay, that I did not consider. Maybe I should roll back this "do whatever you want" kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely the learning curve that we as a movement, I think, need to embrace. And I think the best way to create a culture like that is, I think it's referred to as blind copying, where
Mm.
the population at large will see in certain individuals within a society who they are in awe of. And much like if I had been born in England, I would have developed a British accent. They start incorporating aspects of, this person's, good traits into their everyday lives. So it's not that all Asians really sat down and thought about the costs and benefits of working hard and, showing up on time and, postponing consumption and all this stuff. They basically just started doing it because there are other people who are leaders within their community who did it and they just copied them. So I think
Yeah.
it's on us to have people like Ron Paul and Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Scott Horton. These are the libertarian thinkers. Even someone like Robert Nozick, I think, is very respectable to a large degree. I think if we put those people up as our heroes and they simply lead by example, I think that's the best way to build a culture which we can be proud of. Because I gotta say, it's definitely something I envy, seeing Tucker Carlson walk around Moscow. That subway station, forget the fact that he's totally wrong about the price of, supermarket goods. The
Hmm.
fact that there was no graffiti on that subway, oh my gosh. And just comparing it to the last time I was at Penn Station, it's amazing to see what a really solid culture that has this, sort of cultural continuity, cultural connection, this nationalist idea. That's something that I think is totally beautiful, and it definitely took me too long to appreciate the value of that. So yeah, embracing standards and putting up people who we think are really good leaders, I think has got to be the next move for us generally.
Interesting. That's an interesting thought. Hopefully, libertarians think, hopefully they listen to you on that issue. Um, so I want to go to the question portion of the interview now. Not my questions, but my audience questions. So I'm giving an open invitation to anyone. If any of you have any questions for our guest, please let me know. Put them in the chat. I'll put them up on the screen, and we'll just go from there because this has been a very interesting conversation, and I appreciate you having it with me. Um, you know, one thing that I do want to touch on, though, and this is more of a general issue in politics, not necessarily relating to libertarianism, but it's the issue of status and the society of status. So, if we think about how old world Europe was organized, human value was conflated with your position in the social hierarchy and what titles and honorifics that you had. The New World kind of disputed that because the New World put emphasis on how much are your hands going to touch the dirt and mold it to make something, how much self-reliance and personal responsibility you're going to have, how much perseverance in the face of these vast open wilds, Lewis and Clark style, are you going to have? And that informed the sort of moral, individualistic, natural law-based thinking of that entire founding generation culture. But the society of status still persists in our modern day culture in many different forms in terms of, and I was talking about this before we got on, in terms of celebrities, in terms of influencers in politics, and all kind of things where the value of one's voice and contribution to society is chalked up to how many followers they have. It's chalked up to how much praise they have. What did Emerson say? A man's name is found in the mass approbation of his friends. That kind of status idea. I find that to be dangerous because it takes the emphasis off of the issues. And it makes people who are supposed to be vessels instead the entire issue themselves. And causes this conflation between personality and ideas, which causes the ideas to be lost, the personalities to be elevated, and now we're living in a world of elevated personalities with no substance and just superficiality. That's what celebrity culture is. I'm sorry, I'm on a little bit of a roll, but still. So, how in general does anyone, any keen political observer, deal with this? Because you mentioned, for example, Dave Smith, Scott Horton, all these people. Fine people. But when people think of libertarianism in the contemporary context, they may think of those people. And if they have a problem with those people, they will automatically assume libertarianism has the same problem they have with those people. That's dangerous. I don't like that very much, which is why I tune all of that out. I don't watch anybody. I watch, like I was mentioning, I watch like Glenn Beck, and that's about it. I don't watch anybody because I don't want my mind to be played with by status and personality when I'm really doing something that is putting me in the presence of ideas.
Yeah, status can definitely have an impact on on how we see things. I remember sitting next to a guy who was just drunk in a tank top, and we were just having a conversation. Next thing I know, he's got 600,000 Twitter followers on his anonymous account, and it was in that moment where I realized, oh, I'm so much more of a sucker than I thought I was. I thought it really wouldn't matter, but it's difficult to not be persuaded or attracted to people who have such status. So, as far as what my analysis could be on something like that, we simply just have to compete. And when there is a playing field of the high statist is currently Joe Biden, and the only person dumber than Joe Biden in America is his vice president. I mean, when these are the people who we're going up against, I think libertarians have a much better time now than in, say, the days of Reagan or John F. Kennedy, as far as competing for people's attention or allegiances than they ever did previously. It has been amazing to see the Thomas Sowell following that exists on random YouTube channels, because you have a guy speaking clearly, always dressed nice, and meeting a lot of emotional arguments with a very large amount of empirical research. Same with people like Wilfred Riley or Walter E. Williams. You also have professors like Brian Kaplan doing the same thing. So it's definitely a ground that we need to compete on. And the best way to do it is to have alternatives like TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, so we can at least hopefully get our foot in the door. I don't know where else you would want me to go with something like that, but I think you're definitely right. I remember Glenn Beck was one of the first people who analyzed the Affordable Care Act through the lens of whether or not people should be forced to purchase health insurance against their will, and that
Mhm.
really stood out to me.
Yeah.
So, so taking that principle, that was another one that I was able to extract. And if I had heard it from a random person rather than a guy in a really nice studio who was dressed nice, who had a big following, I don't know if I would have taken it as seriously. So
Man,
it's
that's a
definitely
commentary, isn't it?
it's definitely something that we have to consider, and just leading by example. And Glenn Beck actually reading the books. Saul Alinsky was one of his big ones, where he would actually go to these primary sources of, he makes the case that this person is influenced by this ideology, and writing things on the chalkboard. That really got me at least, interested in education, whereas I always thought education was, Pluto's not a planet and Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. So relying on the status of other people, I think, is very valuable.
Yeah, I think it's certainly so. I think that if you pick from high quality sources, you'll get high quality results, 100%. I just find it oppressive. I find the society of status oppressive simply because it shuts the conversation out from newer voices. and because it relegates legitimacy to personalities instead of ideas. I think if there's a workaround for that, I'm not sure. Most people don't think about this particular idea, so I don't blame you for that. I think about very odd things sometimes when it comes to these issues, but I see it as impacting the quality of not only political representation you get in government status, but also the quality of commentators we have as well. I'm not going to call anyone's name out, but there are, if you look at both the left and the right, there is a deluge of people who don't really have thoughts that go beyond the status quo of their respective factions, whether they be libertarians, conservatives, progressives. If you know what one group thinks, most people who are personalities for that group will just recite what that group thinks. There are the few within those factions that rise above that and go the extra mile, and that should be praised. But a lot of these people, their emphasis is on just being a good factionalist in a sense. And so that's a phenomenon that's not new. Our founders were dealing with this. They themselves were factionalists in a sense. It's interesting. They, out of anyone else in American history, they were the ones who were the most aware of the susceptibility of the Republican system of government to lend towards factional party politics. And they were the ones, many of them, warned against that. And yet they were ensnared in that same system they warned against. So that should just go to show you the fallibility of the human being. Sorry, go on.
So when it comes to whether or not a statist society can be oppressive, I definitely think so, and especially in the political realm. So if you watch a lot of engineering videos on YouTube, the average person who is, going to be making these engineer videos tends to really know what they're talking about. When I look for tech videos and my side job, a lot of these people tend to be very educated. If you look at the high status people in the realm of physics, they really know what they're talking about. The high status people, when it comes to anything like microphones or cars or something like that, you see a high degree of competency. But in the political realm, where there is so little incentive for the average person to get informed, all the brain is going to do is take a shortcut to which personalities they really like, because there's so many issues which are so complex. Just to be, informed on the Russia-Ukraine war from 2014. Forget about how Putin starts it in the year 882 with Rurik. Just to be informed on the events from the Maidan Revolution in 2014 to what's happening today. So few people have the care, because every second you spend doing that is a second less you could be doing something else. So in the political realm, we see it much more so, because we're expecting people to be able to comment on immigration, minimum wage, the Second World War, Israel, Hamas, the Democrats, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, all of these totally separate things. It's sort of like the fool's errand of expecting, the 5-year-old who says, when I'm older, I'm going to be an astronaut and a dentist, and I'm going to play in the NBA, and I'm going to be in the NFL. It's like, that's just too much. So when these political commentators are commenting on a government that's just doing way too much, well, it's going to be impossible for them to accurately analyze almost every aspect of it. Maybe Ben Shapiro's the closest you can do as far as, giving a real idea of someone who is able to show themselves as, being able to be very informed on all these different issues. Okay, you have a handful of people in a population of 330 million. That's exactly what you would expect when you have a huge government that's in all these realms of society. You can't get anyone to actually really understand these issues in depth. So the brain shortcut to who should I listen to is going to use personality as the sorting mechanism of who they're going to listen to. So the bigger the state, the more you're going to have people who are just attracted to personalities as opposed to actual issues.
Yeah. Yeah. It's both a product of the mind, as you mentioned, like a sorting mechanism, but it's also an unfortunate reality of our current era, and I hope that it changes. Anyway, different story, different day. Last question. What is the main takeaway from domestic imperialism? And by the way, guys, before he answers, if you guys have any questions at all, this is the last call. I will put your question up on the screen and I will ask. We'll take about 2 or 3 questions, maybe, because I respect my guest's time and I want him to be able to, of course, be able to go if he needs to. But should be the main takeaway from your book, Domestic Imperialism, and how can people find it? Where are the links to find it or buy it or whatever?
You can get it at libertarianinstitute.org. We give the PDF away totally free. We are a charity, a 501c3, so you can get a free PDF there. Or you could buy it on Barnes & Noble or Amazon if you'd like a hardcover or paperback or Kindle as well. The main takeaway is that so many of the injustices throughout history are pretty clear when looking in the rearview mirror and when you're not really bought into one side or the other. So, in order to determine who is right and wrong in the present, we have to have some objective method of weighing good behavior versus bad behavior. And this means not having double standards for people based on race, gender, ethnicity, or even intelligence when it comes to what rights they should have as a human being. So this generally means this takeaway is the biggest way that this issue was amplified of having double standards is the double standard that people have when it comes to the state. People will clearly say that murder is wrong, yet justify mass murder campaigns that governments regularly involve themselves in. They say that, well, there's nothing really wrong with taxation. You're paying for a service. Don't be so cheap. But if any other organization within society were to begin to issue taxes on your income, well, then you would see it as the theft that it actually is. Military conscription being a $20 word for forced labor and slavery. That is the big takeaway that whenever you have double standards, that little hole in your philosophy is going to attract like a bat signal, the worst psychopaths in the society, and the population at large is not going to have a very big incentive to combat those very few people. So domestic imperialism is just saying that for the same reason the people of Mexico would not have the right to coercively dominate the people of America, the people of Washington, D.C. do not have the right to coercively control 330 million strangers.
All right, and that is a very fine and very, dare I say, pro-American message. And so I am happy that you wrote the book. I'm happy that you're willing to come on and take some poignant questions, of course, done in good faith, but ones that help flesh out, I think, the broader moral and political project of what you're trying to achieve, which is going to be beneficial for generations to come, I believe. So, Keith, thank you so much for coming. I linked your book in the chat. It's right there. You can find it right there. And so I hope that people go ahead and buy it, download it, share it, and things, and have more conversations like the one we had today. I think that it's going to be very, very important going forward that we center our mind on discussing fundamentals and then work our way from there. Do you have anything left for the audience or me that you'd like to say before we go?
I want to thank you for your time in getting through the contents of the book and the thought you put into the questions. Christian Watson, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. Well, you guys have a nice day. I'm going to go get some rest, and you guys have a nice night.